Hi, thank you for joining us for understanding how to recognise problem gambling with your patient. My name is Phoebe James and I'm a Professional Development Officer with the Primary Health Network. Before we go any further, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians on the lands we are all meeting on today and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and my respects to any First Nations people joining us today. Just wanted to mention before we start that this session is being recorded. The recording and the PDF slides will become available on our PHN website in the Education Library in the next few days. We're having a Q&A session at the end of the presentation, so please feel free to put your questions in the box and we'll endeavour to get to all of them. There is also an evaluation at the end that needs to be completed. I will be eternally grateful if you could do this for me. Tonight we have Jake Klaus, a gambling counsellor, provisional psychologist from Gamble Away. We have Matthew Andrews, who's the regional manager from Gamble Away, and Sue Pryor, community engagement and care coordinator from Gamble Away. I will now hand over to Jake.
Okay. Hello everyone. Yes, I'm Jake, and I am a gambling counsellor up here in the Hunter, New England area, based in Armidale, with Matt and Sue.
Yeah, I'm Matt Andrews, and I'm the regional manager for the Hunter, New England area's Gamble Away program.
And I'm Sue. I'm the community engagement and care coordinator, Hunter, New England Gamble Away program.
All right, so just to run through our learning objectives. We will understand the types of gambling and the most common gambling behaviours, outline the impacts of problem gambling, recognise warning signs of problem gambling and the appropriate supports. We will introduce the Gamble Away Hunter, New England program and the services we provide. And we will also outline the Gamble Away Hunter, New England referral pathways. So to get started, just a few stats on gambling in New South Wales. And all of these stats are coming from the New South Wales Gambling Survey, which was published in 2019. So a couple of years ago now, but that is the most current survey that the government has done. So in New South Wales, 53% of adults reported gambling at some point within a 12-month period. 9.4% of adults were considered at-risk gamblers, and 1% of adults in New South Wales were considered problem gamblers. Some of the more common forms of gambling that we see in New South Wales, so 37% of gamblers used lotto tickets, 16% used gaming machines or pokie machines, 13% used instant scratchies, and 13% bet on horse or greyhound races.
And one thing I suppose to note with this as well is that sort of the definition of gambling has sort of extended to include stuff like speculative investments, things like cryptocurrency as well. And there has been sort of a recent increase in the advertising around gambling that we're sort of seeing on TV in particular around times of like football matches and other sporting events. And also within, and we'll sort of touch on it a little bit later, but within sort of the video game sector as well. So young people and children being exposed to either simulated gambling or actual gambling in video games. In addition to this, sort of, and it's not sort of mentioned in these stats, but a lot of the sports betting apps as well that we're sort of seeing, there's a real sort of increase in that, in particular with like young males over the last few years.
So looking at the people we see seeking help for gambling related harm. So up here in the Hunter, New England, we see about 77% of our client base are people who identify as having problem gambling. 17% of people we see are the family, friend, or colleague of someone who gambles, and 6% of our client base are the partners of someone who gambles. The types of gambling we see people looking for help for are, so the most common one is pokie machines, with 67% of our clients experiencing problems with pokie machines, followed by horse and greyhound racing, which is 17%, 9% for sports betting, 3% for lotteries and keno, 2% for casino games, 1% for poker specifically, and 1% for some other form of gambling. And it's interesting to note that 67% of our clients are seeking help for gambling related to pokie machines, when we saw just on the previous slide that only 16% of gamblers use pokie machines. And that's likely because pokie machines are one of the most addictive forms of gambling, and that is where a lot of the money is lost to gambling. So it sort of makes sense that people looking for help are often having issues with pokie machines specifically.
And so, as I sort of touched on before, there's a bit of an emergence of, or an increase in the rate of gambling online, and there's a few sort of issues associated with that. So gambling online can include lottos, betting on horses and greyhounds, sports betting, and online casino games or poker machines. And one of the issues is that it doesn't have the same restrictions as physical venues. So physical venues obviously closed, they've got sort of trading hours, and that's not the case when it comes to online. At any given time, there's a horse race somewhere around the world, or a greyhound race that people can sort of jump online and bet on. Likewise with online casinos. And so there are restrictions within Australia on some sort of forms of online betting. For example, like online casino games are illegal in Australia, but with the sort of emergence of cryptocurrency and technology like VPNs, or like virtual private networks, people can log on to an online casino that might be based in an unregulated country, or a country that doesn't have regulations on bet limits and that sort of thing, and yeah, use cryptocurrency or money that they've converted to cryptocurrency to bet online at any given time. And as I said as well, like there's definitely sort of been an increase or rise in gambling themes and simulated gambling within sort of the video game industry. So the 2020 New South Wales Youth Gambling Study showed that roughly 40% of young people aged 12 to 17 in New South Wales had participated in what they sort of termed as simulated gambling, where it's sort of games that either imitate gambling, and there's not necessarily an opportunity to win money or lose real world money, but yeah, there's still sort of those themes within that game. There's no sort of age restrictions often on that sort of stuff, and that they can access games that have that content on their phones, consoles, computers, or just websites as well. And then that same study found that roughly 30% of those 12 to 17-year-olds had actually participated in actual gambling, where there was sort of the potential to win or lose actual real money. And so that simulated gambling can include stuff like gambling themed games, built-in gambling themed mini games that are sort of just part of the game, or like just more broadly games with gambling elements. And so one thing that we sort of see is games that contain stuff like loot boxes, where a young person will purchase sort of a loot box for real money, and with, I suppose, the potential risk of reward of either getting an item that has value or something that doesn't, or a rare item or not. And that's something that yeah, we're sort of seeing come through our service.
So as mentioned before, 53% of adults in New South Wales said they had gambled in some way within a 12-month period, but that number is higher in our PHN area. So in the Hunter, New England, 60% of adults reported gambling, and on the Central Coast, it was 59% of adults. But it is important to note at this point that obviously not all gambling is an issue. Many people can gamble simply for the entertainment of it or as a social activity, but for some people it can be quite a serious issue that has a lot of impact on their life. So how do we tell when gambling is becoming an issue? The big one for me is if it's negatively impacting other areas of that person's life. So that could be their work life, their family life, or like any other area really. Then that could be a flag that the gambling is becoming a bit of an issue. Also, if there's a felt need to lie about the behaviour, they don't want people knowing where they are or what they're doing, that's a pretty good indicator that there might be an issue. If it's causing them financial problems, obviously it's an issue there. And if they've previously attempted to quit gambling, but that's been unsuccessful, that's also a pretty good indicator that they might need some help there to get that gambling under control. So thinking about the ways gambling can cause harm. So obviously it can have health impacts. People who are problem gamblers are often experiencing pretty high stress. They can also have pretty poor sleep schedules if they're up all night, either at venues gambling or gambling online. It's known that gambling can have some pretty big relationship impacts. It can cause conflict between couples. It can cause issues with joint finances and things like that. People can be distracted from their work or study. Yeah, a lot of the time people with problem gambling will also be gambling at work instead of performing their work activities, which is obviously a pretty big issue. People can be too preoccupied with gambling to be spending time hanging out with friends, doing other activities. Also, if people are borrowing money from their friends, that's obviously going to have impacts on those relationships. Gambling can also have pretty big psychological and well-being impacts as well. You know, the heightened anxiety of having financial issues caused by gambling, the low mood and feeling guilty when you have gambled. Also, it's been found that people with problem gambling have higher risks of suicide, with about 19% having suicidal thoughts and about 4% or 4.7% having attempted suicide, which is higher than the general population. Obviously, there are the financial impacts as well that gambling can have. So here we'll have a video of Ralph telling his story about how he started gambling, how it affected his relationships and his social life and his mental health, and how he benefited from seeking counselling. So I'll play that one now, with any luck.
Guys, the sound isn't working.
Oh, it's not?
I was running the bets for my grandmother.
Oh no, it's working now.
Lovely.
And,
Can we just start it again? Sorry.
Sure.
And gambling commenced 71 years ago. and it was, I was only 8 years old, and it was on a greyhound. I was running the bets for my grandmother to an SP bookmaker, and I placed a bet on a greyhound, which won, and I've never forgotten it. I wasn't gambling, you know, but it was the introduction. So I grew up in a gambling culture. My parents weren't big gamblers. My grandmother was, and so I also in my family there was quite a mixture of the gamblers. So also my mates that I went to school with, people that I'd worked with, all gambled. And my first job was when I was 17 in a government department, and there was an SP bookmaker on board, and so that was for races on Wednesdays and Saturdays and football games. So even back then they had sporting gambling. Anyway, I then got married at 24 years of age, and I had a lovely wife and 3 children. And also I took on extra work working in clubs and pubs, and which was also open to a lot of gambling. And also later on I got another part-time job working at a greyhound track. So I was at home there, and I wasn't supposed to gamble on the greyhounds because I was the judge, but I had ways of someone else putting bets on for me. So that particular track has been closed, so nobody can get back at me there. Yeah. So also from there, my marriage busted up, and gambling had a big part in that, plus other things. And I then remarried some years later, and that busted up again. Gambling was involved in there. And also I had several partners, and it busted up, and gambling was an issue in drinking. So from there on, I got a job working in the regional areas of New South Wales, and I was a rep for 30 years, and with the time that I had after work, sometimes I took days off work, and my life just evolved around gambling. I had to work to get money, to pay off, I had to pay maintenance and stuff like that. And I had big wins, of course, but mostly it ended up getting worse. So from there, I really had developed the problem, become very antisocial. I upset a lot of my family, the extended family. I was an embarrassment to my parents as to my lifestyle. They were good Christians, and I was right out of step. And fortunately today, I've been able to make amends with the rest of my family. My parents have passed on. And, yep. So I made that I was working in a regional town, and I had a big bet on Saturday, and I won quite a huge amount of money, but I put that all back that night in a poker machine. So my compulsion was out of control. I was right out of control, and I was at rock bottom. I would have had mental health issues. I never thought of suicide. I probably a coward. So I had a crash that night after a discussion with my partner, who wasn't very supportive of me. And she said, I can tell you've been gambling, because I told her I only gambled 5 or 10 years. It was hundreds and thousands of dollars. And she gave me an ultimatum that if I didn't stop, I'd come home, all the gear would be out on the road. So I thought about that. Yeah. And so the next morning I got up and did a walk, which I normally done just before breakfast, and I was in a very, very bad state mentally. And so I come back to the motel room and I remembered that there was a helpline and that I'd seen in the tab, and I couldn't remember it, so I picked up my telephone book and found the number and made a call. And after about a 90-minute discussion, I had some things to put in place, and that was to keep away from the venues and also not to carry much cash on me. And at that moment, I didn't have much cash anyway. So I continued there for a couple of weeks, and I've been given some numbers to ring for counselling, and I've done that, and I fronted up the first time for counselling, and I nearly didn't go in because I was just, I was still in denial, and I was just fearful of admitting that I had a problem. And he settled me down, and he told me that we'd go at my pace, and I sort of took notice of that. And after a couple of visits every fortnight, I started to improve in the thinking, and I went for 4 years without gambling. And I busted, I moved to Queensland, I stopped any counselling, and I slowly drifted back into gambling. And it was even worse. It just out of control again. I moved to back in New South Wales, to Coffs Harbour, and I sought counselling through the Lifeline. I had 2 counsellors there, and I was introduced into some meetings with Smart Recovery, which I now can facilitate those meetings. I've done about 300 visits over many years. So I found that recovery was harder if you're busted and trying to get back on. It was a struggle, and I had to fall back on my original advice as to keep away from the venues. So one of my strategies on Saturdays, when I was living at Coffs Harbour, I was a keen gardener, and I decided to go to garage sales on a Saturday, and through that I was able to pick up a lot of cheap plants and trees and bushes, and also it kept me socialising, and I did make some friends out of that. And sometimes I'd be invited to have a cup of tea and some bickies and even for lunch. And I was in Coffs Harbour, and I went as far as Grafton to the north and as far as Nanganbucket to the south. And sometimes I'd stay overnight wherever I was, in a motel or a hotel, but I wasn't gambling. I had this, my car would be packed with flowers and stuff, and books and all that sort of stuff. So it was a good getaway from the gambling. It worked very well. And also I commenced going to TAFE, and I studied the Community Services Certificate 4, which I completed, and there were a few other courses. And that was the reason there was to help other people, put back to society what they helped them in the community. So I've now been 18 years in recovery, and I've busted about half a dozen times, and at this stage I'm in a very good place, and I'm travelling along pretty well. I remarried just recently, 3 years ago. I married a lovely lady, and she's very understanding of my problem, very understanding.
So yeah, in that video, we saw a lot of different common themes in Ralph's story. So, you know, we heard about his relationship problems, his financial problems, mental health problems, all contributed to by gambling. also the benefits he saw from getting counselling and his reluctance at the start, but how he found that beneficial. And also the fact that it's a continuing effort, like he talked about, you know, getting okay for gambling for a while and then he would lapse and then he'd be going okay for a while and lapse. So it is that sort of continual effort, I think it's important to point out. Talking about the financial harms of gambling, looking at some of the average losses. This is specifically to pokie machines. So on the Central Coast, about $32.4 million is lost every month just to poker machines. In Newcastle, it's about 19.3 million, and in Tamworth, it's about 4.4 million. And so that's every month that much is lost to pokie machines, and that doesn't include any other form of gambling. So those are some pretty astounding numbers there. And looking at who is losing that money, problem gamblers, which if we remember make up only 1% of the New South Wales population, account for 36.7% of gambling expenditure. Moderate risk gamblers account for 14.5%, and low risk gamblers accounted for 19.5%. So we can see quite a large amount of that money that is being lost to gambling is coming from quite a small section of the New South Wales population. And it's not just the individual who's gambling that is harmed. For people that were classified as low risk gamblers, usually about one other person is affected. For everyone identified as a moderate risk gambler, that's 3 other people can be affected. And for problem gamblers, it's been estimated that up to 6 other people are affected. And so again, that's those people like family, like friends, colleagues, children, who can be somehow impacted by someone else's gambling. Things you can look for in someone who you think might have a gambling problem is they're probably trying to hide where they're spending their time. They might be reluctant to talk about their finances. There might be money that's gone missing and they're not able to account for where that money has gone. They might be frequently borrowing money from other people. They could have fluctuating finances. So sometimes they'll have a lot of money and then just a few days later, they'll have none and they'll not be able to account for where that's gone. You might see it impacting other areas of their life, like discussed before, or you may even see a change in their mood. It's often people won't initially seek help for gambling. However, doctors, nurses, and other allied health professionals are in a really good position to identify patients who might be experiencing problem gambling. Someone who is experiencing problem gambling might present with issues relating to financial problems, relationship issues, stress, or some other sort of mental health issue. That's why it's important to ask the question about their gambling behaviour, because they might not necessarily think that's relevant, but that is often a very contributing factor. Some good times that we have found to ask about gambling is when conducting lifestyle assessments, when talking about stresses the client is facing, when administering mental health assessments, or when asking about other addictions such as drug or alcohol. If you want to do a screener on your clients to sort of screen for problem gambling, there is a few different options. There is a problem gambling severity index, which is what we use in Gamble Aware, and it sort of classifies people into low, medium, or high risk gambling behaviour. There's also the brief biosocial gambling screen, which is just a little bit shorter than the PGSI. There's the G8 online screening tool, which is a really good one if your client is wanting to fill it out themselves at home, or there is the lie bet questionnaire, which is just 2 simple questions. It's, do you lie about your gambling behaviour, and do you bet more than you can afford to lose? So all of those provide a good indication of whether someone might be experiencing problem gambling. Or you can also use your professional judgment. If you think your client their gambling behaviour might be impacting their life negatively, yeah, they are going to be eligible for our program.
Yeah, so a little bit, I suppose, about the Gamble Aware program in the Hunter, New England. So I suppose one caveat to this is we provide service through Centacare in the Hunter, the New England region, sorry, and Catholic Care Hunter Manning in the Hunter region. For the Central Coast, those services, the Gamble Aware program is provided through Wesley. And so some of the stuff that I'll talk about over the next few slides may differ a little bit with the Central Coast and the service that they offer down there. So overall, like Gamble Aware is a free service, and it's funded by the New South Wales state government, so the Office of Responsible Gambling. And its overall aim is to really work towards zero gambling related harm in New South Wales. And the way that the program sort of does that is through like research, education, and support for individuals as well as communities and other service providers. So we can provide service to individuals who actually identify as having a problem with the actual gambling behaviour, as well as anyone who is affected by gambling related harm. So that can be yeah, as Jake sort of touched on, colleagues, family, friends, partners, children, yeah, really anyone that might have been impacted by someone's gambling behaviour. The way that we sort of do it is we've got gambling counsellors and who sort of also fill like mental health counselling roles as well as financial counsellors and care coordination and education. So basically we can provide counselling focused on like stopping or reducing the actual gambling behaviour. We can provide self-help resources and we can support clients through self-exclusion, which is basically a voluntary agreement that's sort of binding with venues that they're not going to go in or not going to be allowed to go in and actually utilise their poker machines or yeah, any other types of betting or gambling. In terms of mental health counselling and counselling in general, we can provide it through sort of face-to-face, phone, video, sort of / telehealth to anyone. As I said, whether it's the individual who gambles or anyone that's sort of associated to them. And we sort of have generally sort of 6 sessions that they'd be able to access counselling for, with the option to sort of extend it to 12 sessions. There's no need for a mental health care plan or anything like that to access it, and as I said, it's all free. Once the client actually is with our service, they might sort of opt to not necessarily use those counselling sessions to speak about their gambling. They might use it to speak about another comorbidity, so it might be depression or anxiety or something like that that they're dealing with, or another stressor, and that's fine. They can use those 6 or 12 sessions to address those areas of need. In terms of our financial counsellors, so they basically provide financial skills building to clients and advocate on their behalf to help sort of them get back on track from a financial standpoint. And then finally, with our care coordination and education, that's really sort of case management and coordination of services for that client to link them up with other supports whether that be alcohol and other drugs, potentially other mental health supports, education, employment, that sort of stuff that might have been impacted by their gambling or their exposure to gambling harm. We also can run sort of groups as well and education sessions like tonight, but we do have some like recovery groups that we deliver in across both the Hunter and the New England area, so we can support clients in that way as well. So at the moment, we have currently have across the Hunter New England 5 gambling counsellors who are the psychologists, counsellors, social workers. We've got 2 full-time equivalent financial counsellors, 2 care coordinators, and one intake officer. And sort of the general area that we service is the entire Hunter New England. So that map there, anything on there really, we service. Some of the outlying areas where we don't have staff based at the moment, we've got staff in Newcastle, Muswellbrook, Armidale, Tamworth, sort of outreaching to Glen Innes and Narrabri. We've got a staff member in Narrabri as well. But if there's a need identified in a town like we did in Narrabri, there's potential for us to send a staff member out there face to face to support those clients. Or we can offer, like I said, telehealth online phone sessions for some of those sort of smaller communities as well, if need be. And so in terms of eligibility, as I said before, it's really anyone affected by gambling harm. So it can be children or children of parents who gamble. We can support like community groups and workplaces that would like to just know more about gambling harm, individuals affected by someone else's gambling, people who have been affected by their partner's gambling, individuals with mental health concerns who gamble to help them cope, and individuals concerned about their own gambling behaviours. We haven't got there's no sort of age limit for us, so it doesn't matter whether they're sort of 10-year-old child through to someone elderly as well. Like there's no sort of age limit, gender sort of criteria or anything like that. Anyone can access it. So what we largely are sort of seeing here in the Hunter New England, average age of the clients that we're seeing is 38. We've had some clients in their 80s, as well as some children as young as 10 come through the program. The majority of the people that we're sort of supporting identify as male, with 60% and 40% female. And I suppose the proportion of male gamblers is probably a little bit higher than that, but as with most sort of mental health services and support services, men tend to access services or be more reluctant to access services than females. So a bit of an example of a situation that you sort of might come across. So you might have a patient who reports they're experiencing a lot of stress sort of recently, and when you sort of ask about what the cause of that stress is, they might state that they can't afford their rent because they've gambled all their money on the poker machines. That client can access like counselling support to get help for their gambling behaviour, and as well support with learning how to cope with stress, and access our financial counselling services to manage any debts that they might have developed. And that's really because people who experience mental health issues and gamble are at risk of experiencing gambling harm, and the gambling behaviour can become a coping strategy, which in turn leads to that sort of gambling harm. Another example is you might have a patient that advises that they're experiencing depression and they're in need of support. And yeah, when you do ask them if they gamble, they respond with something like, yeah, I have a bit of a punt with my mates, but it's not a problem. That client is still eligible to access our service if they want to, even though they don't identify it necessarily as a problem. It may just be that they're at a sort of pre-contemplative stage of change, and we're able to sort of work with them around potentially the depression, and talk to them about their sort of gambling behaviour as well, and get them to a stage where if they'd like to, they can sort of work on that as well. And then finally, you might have a young person who comes in and is in need of sort of mental health support due to exposure to something like domestic violence, and they might sort of mention that one of their parents was a regular gambler or is experiencing gambling harm, but they're no longer in the picture. That young person would be eligible for our sort of trauma-informed therapy with our gambling counsellors, because that young person's been exposed to gambling harm through their parents' sort of gambling behaviour. So generally what happens with us is at the end of the slide, there'll be a few links. The easiest sort of way is we've got both a number and a website or an intake sort of link that can be completed either with the client, or they can be provided with that and do it in their own time. So once we actually receive that referral, our intake officer, who's based in Narrabri, will get in contact with that person, and we'll sort of finalise any of the details that they need to sort of gather for that referral. And we use a step care model, so a level of need will sort of be determined, level 1 through to 5, and based on where they sort of fall within that level, we'll then offer them services to sort of help them meet that need. So level 1 would potentially just be some like self-help resources and some information, through to level 5, which would be sort of acute mental health, and we'd be looking to to sort of direct them to services up at the hospital or emergency services to sort of address that concern. If someone was to come in at a lower level, we can sort of override that if they do want access, then like counselling or something like that isn't necessarily linked to level 1 or whatever. From there, we'll connect them with appropriate services. So potentially they'll see like Sue or one of our care coordinators, who will sort of do a bit of an assessment with them and gather a bit of information about what else might be going on, link them up with services, advocate on their behalf, and that can be going on while they're actually accessing our counsellors, whether that's financial or gambling counsellors. Once they've finished up with the service, either through their own sort of reaching their goals or sort of hitting the sort of 12-session limit that we have, we'll then sort of close the file off, but we'll do a 3, 6 and 12-month follow-up with that client, just to sort of see how they're travelling, see if they're still sort of tracking towards maintaining the goals that they've sort of set, or if they need some additional support. And if that is the case, we can either re-engage them into our service or look elsewhere to refer them on to and support them.
And so here we have just one more video of some people talking about what it took for them to seek help for their gambling behaviour.
What made me finally seek help for the issues I was experiencing with gambling was my partner at the time. I'll never forget these words. She pulled me aside and she said, "I think this is more of a problem than you care to admit." And something inside me sparked. But she did one better. She gave me a number, and that number was for a support line. And I called that number, and that's how I initially sought help.
What made me seek help was that I was experiencing depression. As time passed on, I began to have thoughts of suicide as well. And I made a plan. And that's when I really knew that something was wrong, that I wasn't coping. So then I had to do, what am I going to do? I've got children to look after. I have to manage my situation better. And that's when I rang the gambling line again, and they were able to really help me with trying to move forward. And so there began a life of trying to grapple with his gambling addiction and my experience as I was living it, with what I was going through as well, and what the children were going through.
I was in a very depressed state. I was disgusted with myself. I was beating myself up. My self-esteem was, how do I get out of this? I was determined that I had to change my lifestyle.
What made me seek help for my gambling issues was a crisis. Unfortunately for me, I had a relationship crisis at a point in my gambling addiction where I thought I had control, and my wife separated from me for a period of time. And that was the impetus that I needed, I think, to seek help and recover from my addiction.
Yeah, so as I sort of touched on before, if you do sort of want to get in contact with us, we've got both the phone number for us, Hunter New England, direct there, as well as Northern Sydney and Central Coast, which, as I said, is run through Wesley Mission. We've also got the email addresses for both. And then, as I said, we've got an online referral form that can be completed either with the client or the patient, or they can be provided with that and do it at their own sort of time. And then once we receive that, we can get in contact with them and finalise everything to start that support. At the moment, for the Hunter New England, there's no wait lists or anything like that. So as I'm sure a lot of you guys are aware, there's currently some pretty substantial wait lists in sort of the mental health space for seeing psychologists or counsellors, particularly free services. And so at the moment, there's no wait list. So basically, we would be able to organise an appointment. Usually, once we've received that online referral, it's within sort of the day we receive it. If not, the next business day, we'll get in contact with them. And usually, if the client has a time available, it's usually within the next week that we're able to sort of organise a session with them, which is great. I can't guarantee that will be the case sort of moving forward through the years, but at this sort of stage, that's the case. So if you do sort of have any questions that you think of outside of this session, then feel free to send an email or give us a call, and we'll be more than happy to help out. But thanks for your time, and if anyone has got any questions, we're more than happy to answer.
Thanks so much, guys. We don't have any questions at this stage, which to me just means that your presentation was oh wait, got one in just on the bell. Do you cater for substance use also?
Not specifically. So the client has to sort of flag, I suppose, that that they have gambled or that they are experiencing some sort of gambling harm. If they then sort of decide to use those sessions to speak about their substance use or misuse, then that's fine. Like, we know that there's a large overlap between comorbidity between gamblers and people who use substances. And so because they do go hand in hand, we can sort of support them in that way if that's what they want to use those sort of sessions for. But it would be with the view of really reducing that gambling harm through addressing their substance use.
Okay, they're coming through now. Thank you so much, guys. Lovely. Do you cater for clients with cognitive issues like dementia who have an issue with gambling?
It's something, like that we don't specifically sort of, I suppose, cater directly for that or advertise that. All of our clinicians are registered psychologists, and we'd be able to sort of put in place measures to make sure that those clients feel supported. Certain things that we are able to do, even like within sort of local communities and stuff, are things like some clients don't feel necessarily comfortable attending the office, and they might feel comfortable doing a session from a service that they are already accessing. So it might be, for example, an Aboriginal medical service in the region. We can have our clinicians go down there if there's a space available and see them in that location, and to save them sort of coming here or whatever. So it's not sort of that we restrict the service from anyone, and we'd be more than happy to sort of work with clients who are experiencing dementia if need be. And if it's an area that we identify a real need, we'd be able to sort of look at the potential of some sort of focused professional development for staff to build their capacity to service that client group as well.
Okay. All right, well, thank you for your questions, and thank you to the team for answering them. It looks like we don't have any other questions coming through. I'll talk slowly just in case that changes. First of all, I wanted to thank Jake, Matt, and Sue for presenting tonight. Absolutely fantastic. I learned a whole bunch about scary statistics with gambling, so thank you for that. And thank you for everyone who attended tonight. I know that it's an inconvenient time, it's a dinner time, and depending where you are in Australia, it's wet and miserable outside. So thank you for coming and taking the time out of your nights. Again, if you could just fill out the evaluation form for me, I will be eternally grateful. And other than that, stay safe, look after each other, and thank you very much.
Thanks for your time.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.